The shelter echoed with noise, sharp barks, excited whines, paws scratching against metal bars as young dogs jumped desperately for attention. Visitors walked aisle by aisle, their eyes catching on the playful energy of puppies wagging their tails, the younger dogs pressing their noses against the wire as if begging to be chosen. But at the very end of the row, in the farthest shadowed corner, lay a very different sight. An old dog, his muzzle frosted with gray, sat quietly, his body stiff and worn from years of waiting. His cloudy eyes held the weight of countless days passed in silence, a mixture of longing and resignation. Unlike the others, he did not bark or leap. He simply watched, as though hope had been drained from him long ago. One by one, people walked past without a second glance, until Daniel stopped. He crouched down, studying the frail figure, and whispered softly through the bars, "You've waited long enough, haven't you?" In that instant, something flickered in the old dog's gaze, a faint spark, as if he had heard those words before, long ago, and still remembered what they meant. The shelter staff exchanged uneasy glances when Daniel pointed to the old dog in the corner. One of them, a young woman with tired eyes, hesitated before speaking. "Are you sure about him?" "He's well, he doesn't have much time left. Most families prefer the younger ones. They grow with you, bring years of joy. This one, he's already at the end of his road." Her words weren't cruel, just practical, the kind of explanation she had probably given countless times before to people who looked at the old ones with pity but never followed through. Daniel, however, didn't flinch. He looked at the dog again, that fragile frame, that quiet dignity in his tired eyes, and then back at the staff with steady resolve. "Everyone deserves a home," he said firmly, "especially at the end." His voice carried a kind of finality that silenced further objections. The paperwork was drawn up, and Daniel signed without hesitation, his pen pressing hard against the paper as though sealing a promise. Minutes later, the shelter gate opened, and the forgotten dog stepped outside for the first time in years. His paws trembled against the unfamiliar ground, his body frail, but his tail gave the faintest wag, as if some small piece of hope had returned. For Daniel, it wasn't just adoption. It was redemption, a vow that this soul would never be overlooked again. Daniel's fingers trembled as he carefully unfolded the brittle paper, the edges yellowed with time, creased from being pressed beneath the dog's collar for so long. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, the kind of script that carried emotion more than elegance. At the very top were the words, "To whoever loves him next." For a moment, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He read the line again, slower this time, the weight of it sinking in. It wasn't just a note. It was a plea. He unfolded further, and with each sentence, his heart clenched tighter. The words told of a family who once adored this dog, calling him their protector, their comfort, their companion through dark nights. They had not abandoned him out of cruelty, but had been broken apart by circumstances beyond their control, a tragedy that stripped them of home and stability. With aching honesty, they explained that surrendering him to the shelter was the last, most painful act they ever had to endure. The note spoke of love that had never faded, and of a desperate hope that one day, someone kind would find him and give him the dignity he deserved. By the time Daniel finished reading, his eyes were wet with tears. He looked down at the old dog resting at his feet, realizing he was holding the last thread of a story that began years ago, and now it was his turn to carry it forward. That first night in Daniel's quiet home was unlike anything the old dog had experienced in years. For the first time, he wasn't surrounded by the echo of barking or the cold cement floor of a shelter. Instead, there was warmth, the glow of a lamp, the softness of a blanket laid out just for him, and the gentle presence of a man who looked at him not with pity, but with respect. Daniel sat beside him on the floor, a brush in hand, moving slowly through the dog's tangled, matted fur. Each stroke seemed to lift away not just knots but years of neglect, years of being overlooked. The old dog sighed, his body easing into the rhythm, his cloudy eyes closing in weary relief. Then, Daniel's hand brushed against something hard beneath the collar. His brow furrowed. Carefully, He felt again and discovered a small lump tucked against the leather. With delicate fingers, he slid it free, a folded piece of paper, edges frayed, brittle with age. His heart skipped as he realized it had been there for years, pressed against the dog's neck, carrying some hidden truth no one had noticed. The air in the room grew heavy, silent. Daniel unfolded it slowly, each crease cracking faintly, as though the paper itself was reluctant to let go of the story it had guarded all this time. The paper trembled in Daniel's hands as he smoothed out its fragile folds. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still legible, written in shaky, uneven handwriting that seemed to carry the weight of sorrow within every stroke. At the very top, the first line read, "To whoever loves him next." Daniel's breath caught. The words were simple, but they struck like thunder, carrying a depth of grief and hope entwined together. He stared for a long moment before continuing, as if bracing himself for what he was about to uncover. As his eyes moved down the page, tears welled against his lashes. The note revealed a family story, not one of abandonment, but of heartbreak. They had cherished this dog, raised him with love, and watched him grow into a loyal guardian. But life had shattered around them. A tragedy, though unnamed, its pain was felt between the lines, had ripped away their home, their stability, and ultimately their ability to care for him. They wrote that surrendering him to the shelter was the most agonizing decision of their lives. "Please," the note pleaded, "don't see him as unwanted. He was loved deeply. We pray the next heart he finds will love him as much as we did." By the time Daniel finished, his vision blurred. He looked at the old dog lying quietly at his feet and whispered, voice breaking, "They never stopped loving you, and now neither will I." As Daniel continued reading, the handwriting grew more personal, more tender, as if the writer had poured their heart onto the page. The note spoke of a little boy who had grown up with the dog, a boy who had given him the name Buddy. From the very first day, Buddy had been more than just a pet. He had been a brother, a guardian, a constant shadow at the boy's side. The letter described how Buddy would curl up at the foot of the bed every night, and when nightmares came, he would climb closer, pressing his warm body against the child until the fear melted away. During thunderstorms, when the windows shook and lightning lit up the room, Buddy stood guard, growling at the thunder as though he could scare it away for his boy's sake. They shared birthdays, scraped knees, childhood secrets whispered into soft ears. "He is family," the note read. "He is love in its purest form." And yet, despite all this, the family had been torn apart. The letter spoke of an accident that had shaken them, followed by financial struggles that stripped them of their home. With no roof to give him, no security left to offer, they made the painful choice to surrender Buddy to the shelter. The final lines were written like a prayer, almost trembling off the page. "Please, if you are reading this, love him. Let him know he was never abandoned in spirit. Let him know he was always wanted." Daniel sat motionless on the living room floor, the letter still open in his trembling hands. The silence of the room was broken only by the steady sound of the old dog's breathing, a slow rise and fall that carried years of weariness. Buddy, as the note had called him, lifted his head and gently placed it on Daniel's lap, as though he understood the storm of emotions crashing within the man's heart. His cloudy eyes looked up with quiet trust, and in that gaze Daniel felt the weight of two worlds colliding, the grief of a family forced to let go, and the promise of a man willing to begin again. Time seemed to fold in on itself. The love that had once surrounded Buddy had not vanished, but had simply been waiting, carried forward until this moment. Tears rolled down Daniel's cheeks, dripping onto the fur he now stroked with reverence. He leaned closer, his voice breaking into a whisper. "Don't worry, Buddy, you're home now. I'll love you for the rest of your days." The words weren't just comfort. They were a vow, a binding promise spoken into the quiet of that night. And as if he understood, Buddy gave the faintest wag of his tired tail, a small spark of life answering back, as though to say, "That's all I ever needed." From that night onward, Daniel lived with a new purpose, to make every remaining day of Buddy's life a chapter worth remembering. Each morning, he rose early to prepare a small, warm breakfast, sometimes scrambled eggs, sometimes tender chicken, always seasoned with the kind of care most people reserved for family. Then he would clip the leash gently onto Buddy's collar, and they would stroll together through the nearby park. Their walks were never rushed. Daniel matched his steps to the old dog's slower pace, allowing Buddy to sniff the flowers, linger by the trees, and feel the grass beneath his tired paws. Children would sometimes run up, asking why the dog moved so slowly, and Daniel would kneel down with a smile, explaining, "He's a gentleman of many years. We walk with his wisdom, not our speed." At home, Daniel made sure Buddy had the softest bed, a thick blanket placed by the window where the sunlight streamed in, warming his aching joints. Neighbors often looked on with surprise at such devotion toward a frail, aging dog. But whenever they asked why, Daniel's answer never changed. With quiet conviction, he would stroke Buddy's head and reply, "Because he deserves to know he mattered." And in those words, he wasn't just speaking to others. He was reminding himself of the sacred vow he had made to a soul that the world had nearly forgotten.